The Shah of Iran had somewhere between $20 billion and $100 billion when he fled. Nobody agrees on what happened to it. By 1979, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi was one of the richest men on earth. Oil wealth, strategic geopolitics, decades of accumulation. The Iranian Revolution erased him in weeks. What most people believe is straightforward. He stole from his country, hid money offshore, and died in exile a billionaire. The evidence seems airtight. Swiss bank accounts, real estate across Europe and America, documented transfers, case closed. Except the numbers don't hold up. In 1980, the U.S. government froze what it claimed were his assets. The total, $405 million, not $20 billion, not $100 billion, less than $500 million. If he'd truly stolen a century of Iranian oil revenue, where was it? The accepted narrative collapsed under scrutiny. Journalists began digging. Historians cross-referenced accounts. What emerged was messier, more human, and far less cinematic than the villain billionaire story. The Shah wasn't a secret oligarch. He was something else entirely, a man caught between two worlds, spending faster than he could steal and catastrophically misjudging his own survival. Start with the money itself. The Shah's annual income from oil was real, roughly $20 billion in peak years during the 1970s. But income isn't wealth. Wealth is what remains after you spend. And the Shah spent like few men in history have spent. His military budget alone consumed 30% of government revenue. He bought fighter jets, destroyers, tanks. American contractors made fortunes. He commissioned palaces. Chinese letter CONSTRUCTED highways, dams, universities. He subsidized food, fuel, housing. He funded his own cult of personality across every medium. Spending money wasn't corruption, it was policy. It was visible. It was the point. Then came the corruption layer. Yes, he took. His family took. Cronies took. Kickbacks, contracts steered to allies, properties seized and sold to favorites. But even this was modest relative to the total spend. Estimates of personal corruption ranged from $1 to $5 billion over his entire 37-year reign. Significant, not $50 billion. By the mid-1970s, the Shah began genuinely preparing for exile. Not consciously, not explicitly, but he diversified. He bought property, London, Paris, New York. He moved money to Switzerland, to the US, to holding companies. He did what wealthy people have always done. He built an escape route in case the throne cracked. The problem was timing and scale. He didn't move nearly enough, fast enough. By 1978, inflation was spiraling. The revolution was accelerating. He had weeks, not months. Some assets liquidated at losses. Some were frozen mid-transfer. Some were simply abandoned. He left with what he could carry and what was already abroad. When he landed in Egypt on January 16, 1979, he was wealthy. Not what he'd been, not what mythology claims. Wealthy enough to live well, not wealthy enough to be untouchable. He had real estate. He had accessible bank accounts. He had about $405 million in liquid assets that the U.S. could find and freeze. The rest of the fortune, the imagined $20 billion, the $50 billion, the $100 billion, never existed. It was spent on armies, on buildings, on the machinery of a state, on the appearance of permanence. The revolutionaries found empty vaults. The historians found receipts. This matters because it reframes what the Shah actually was. Not a kleptocrat hoarding billions, a spender, a believer in his own permanence. A man who confused state resources with personal wealth and spent both as though neither could run out. He was catastrophically wrong. His death in Cairo in 1980 was quiet. Cancer. He had property. He had bank accounts. He was comfortable. But he was also a man who'd ruled a nation and ended with a fraction of what he'd spent. The irony wasn't that he'd stolen everything. It was that he'd had everything and believed it would never end. The vanished billions were never hidden. They were never stolen in the classical sense. They were spent on weapons, on infrastructure, on the fantasy of eternal rule. When the revolution came, there was nothing left to vanish. The real collapse wasn't financial. It was psychological. A man who'd spent like a god discovered he was mortal. What this teaches us is harder than the simple theft narrative. Corruption isn't always hidden. Sometimes it's visible, normalized, embedded in state budgets, and justified as national security. Sometimes the richest men in the world aren't secretly wealthy, they are spending faster than anyone can measure. And sometimes, collapse isn't a scandal, it's arithmetic. Subscribe to uncover the financial truths buried under the headlines, where the real stories live in the specifics, not the myths.